12 o'clock. Good afternoon, everyone in California and elsewhere in the world. I'm Ian Klaus, the founding director of Carnegie California. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, the oldest think tank in the United States. We have global centers in Beirut, Beijing, Brussels, Berlin, Delhi, and now we have a presence in the form of an office and program in California. We're here because we believe that on issues where the global and the local intersect, California is an essential player, and that includes on questions of democracy in the 21st century, as well as the intersection of democracy and digital technologies. Of course, digital technologies and democracy have a recent and fraught history, having moved quite quickly from utopian optimism to a dystopian digital world. But there's still reason for hope when engaged with fact-based best practices from around the world. And so we're here today to talk about new developments in digital democracy, and in particular, deliberations and what technologies like artificial intelligence mean for them, but also what we in California can learn from practices that have emerged in Europe and elsewhere, and what the rest of the world can also learn from experiments that are happening here in California. We have a tremendous group joining us for the conversation. It will be led by Micah Weinberg, a non-resident scholar with Carnegie California, and the group brings expertise, including practitioner expertise and scholarly expertise from across the United States and the world. And so I'll be listening in too. It's a great pleasure to be here with you all. And now I will pass the mic to Micah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ian. So really looking forward to this conversation today. We're going to be hearing from a number of practitioners and experts, as Ian said, including Amy Tong, Senior Counselor for Government Efficiency, Technology, and Innovation, and the prime mover behind Engaged California. In this role and in her previous role as Secretary of the Government Operations Agency. But we're also going to be putting this in a broader context. And for that conversation, we're lucky to have Joe Matthews. He's a fellow at the Berggruen Institute's Renovating Democracy program and the co-president of the Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy and a global leader in this space. We're also joined by Zabre Valentine, who runs the Public Good Group and is an expert in both deliberative and consultative democratic practices. And finally, a colleague of mine from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Richard Youngs, joining us from Madrid, quite late, although since it's Spain, he hasn't had dinner yet at midnight. He's a senior fellow in the Democracy, Conflict, and Governance program at Carnegie. So we'll jump into the program. I think we should start with Amy to give us a few minutes of remarks on the Engaged California program to kick us off and then lead into our panel. Good to see you, Amy.
Hello. Hi. How's everyone doing? And really excited to be here. And thank you for inviting me. I want to just maybe share a little bit of our program that was launched. Oh my goodness, I feel like it's only been a couple of months, but definitely took a lot of time to pull this off. And huge shout out to Carnegie and Berggruen and many of the panelists who are also our design partners to make this happen. This program is called Engaged California, and it is a digital platform to support really a desire for the governor to finding the way to connect the residents of California a lot closer to those in the policy-making area, in this case happen to be the state government, as a way of helping the state to set priority by telling us directly what is important to our residents, by having a way to be part of the conversation that for those service delivery that they're currently experiencing, are we meeting the marks? Are we not meeting the marks? And for any things that are a little bit more sticky and harder, has lots of complexity, a matter of a platform to have live deliberation with each other, other residents who are interested in improving governmental delivery of services, to truly understand that from whether it's a policy setting perspective or implementation perspective, there's usually different aspect people may need to take into consideration. And the deliberation process will allow folks to see each other's perspective, and then hopefully from a very different perspective can be brought forward with some type of consensus after you have a chance to truly understand what others' perspective really meant. And this is a way that the governor has been wanting to do ever since he was even the mayor of San Francisco. And he had a book called Citizenville, specifically speaks to the power, if you will, of our residents' voice in terms of driving priorities of governmental services. And we had, again, as I mentioned, the fortunate opportunity working with many that you will be hearing later on from this panel about the experience of designing this particular engagement. And some might say, hey, it's just another fancy way of running social media or Reddit. And some would just say, why is this even important? There has been so many platforms for people to express their opinions. And we really coming back to expressing opinion is one thing, but finding consensus in different opinions and get to action that needs to be taken is really what we're going after. And so, as I mentioned, we launched this as a pilot on a very important topic on LA recovery, and we have seen overwhelming participation for those that are dealing with the LA fire, as well as those are local residents who are very interested in having their voice heard and how the community is to be recovered. And in the past, oh my goodness, a few weeks and of watching the online deliberation, or we started actually what's called an agenda setting phase, I was blown away on how constructive those comments were. I was blown away on how people were candid and honest, but still very respectful of the different opinion. I was more blown away by the fact that people were very actively liking each other's comments and suggestions, even though they may not be what they started with from a certain perspective. And so much so, after I think it's about 6 weeks of agenda setting period, we thought that every single one of those topics, 9 of them, will require deliberation. But chances are, by this level of engagement with each other, quite a few of those 9 people have already reached consensus and to say, you know what, now it is for you all to take action because we don't have a disagreement on the need and desire of this anymore. And that to me is this deliberative, platform for deliberation. It's already working. And again, we know this is a novelty in terms of engaging public opinion, and we know that there's still much more we need to learn on how to do this. And that's why I'm very, very pleased to have this opportunity to be here today, not only to share with you a little bit of what we have done, but also more importantly, to learn from you and hear from you on what we can do with this particular platform. So this type of engagement, hearing the opinions, trying to get consensus, trying to get constructive into really a voice to our residents is what we're focusing on. So with that, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Amy. It's been a real privilege to get the chance to work with you and your team on this project. All right, well, let's call back up our panel and start talking about Engage California in the global context. And we'll start with you, Joe. So it's been super excited to be working on this, but how are we doing here in the United States? In contrast to the rest of the world, is there a difference in terms of our progress and deliberative democratic engagement? And if so, why?
I think it's probably fair to call us laggards. there is certainly in sort of nonprofit outside government spaces, and then tech companies and social media, there have been attempts to label things, to create tools. But in terms of the deliberative tools that are tied to governance and implementation, we've had very little of that. And we sort of missed a moment where a lot of places around the world, 10 and 15 years ago, started to build these tools. I would argue that's probably because American local governments are relatively weak and insular, particularly as opposed to our centralized national government, where sort of presidents and courts increasingly exercise authoritarian power. That trend is longstanding and has worked against this. In the rest of the world, which you saw particularly after the Great Recession, which in a number of major cities brought sort of new, younger activist folks into local government, you saw a lot of experimentation with all kinds of democratic innovations that you don't see very often in U.S. cities. And those, and among these were deliberative tools. Leaders in this were places like Seoul, Vienna, and Richard is joining us from Madrid, which was a leader in this, in its government in creating tools called Decide Madrid, and then now has a sort of second life beyond Madrid. It's slowed down in Madrid as Consul and is used around the world. The other one of the other popular tools is from Barcelona, from the city and commune of Barcelona, called Decidim, which is also used now in thousands of governments and other kinds of institutions around the world. I think, though, to end on an optimistic note, there has been a decline in this space in recent years, and the Sloanian Democracy Institute, which studies this, it's based outside Dublin, has sort of seen there's been some consolidation in the vendors that do this. It may have slowed it down. Also, polarization weakens and works against this. You're seeing at all levels of government around the world intense focus on outcomes rather than the process of democracy. The kind of entities that have donated to these private foundations are again becoming more partisan and more interested in getting their own priorities fixed. And then I think you see a trend in governments not wanting having these big, broad tools like Decidim and Consul that allowed for really co-creation and decision-making by regular people. Governments feel under threat as institutions, and they want what they want. These are becoming weaker engagement tools to ratify the policy choices of government. That's a risk with all these tools. It's actually something I worry about, that kind of capture I worry about happening with Engage California. So that decline and the fact that AI is scrambling all this space leaves an opportunity for this laggard, the United States, to catch up, and perhaps quite quickly.
Right on. Well, as we're catching up, Zabre, we need to make sure Joe referenced sort of designing these for policy impact. And that's been a real focus of yours as a design partner. What are some of the key aspects of making sure that we're designing for impact successfully?
Mentioned the difference between focusing on process versus results. And when you're thinking about the public's excitement, investment in, trust, and confidence in their system of government, they're going to be paying a lot of attention to results. Like, a government is only as good as the results that it produces for the general welfare, one could argue. So thinking about how to be sure that when we're undertaking these processes, that they're designed to produce meaningful results to the people who participate and who they're on behalf of is definitely really important. So I'd call out two things to be aware of at a high level. One is designing for results doesn't just mean bolting on an advocacy campaign at the end. Although thinking about what's going to happen after you have recommendations to translate them into actual policy that affects people's lives is important. but it means that you think about every step of the process from the very first one differently. So it means that you're thinking about how you decide what topic people are going to talk about in a slightly different way, because you're thinking about what's going to be easy, hard to move forward, what has more risk, less risk, what requires a legislative solution versus something that you can just wake up the next day and start doing yourself, versus something that might require a constitutional amendment. You need to sort of be thinking about all this stuff on the front end. So that's something you're going to be weaving in from the beginning. The second point is to not assume that getting something done necessarily is going to be adversarial or face a lot of resistance. It may, sometimes it does, but find out, don't assume. So one of the things that we did differently, I was involved in a statewide civic assembly in New Hampshire about a year ago. New Hampshire Together is the organization that's now moving these things forward and continuing to plan more. What we did differently there is, at the very beginning, we created a bipartisan advisory council of folks who really knew the politics of the state. We went and talked to the governor's policy guy. It's a small state. He's got one main policy guy, before we started, to sort of find out if something got to his desk, is there something that he absolutely wouldn't sign, would love to see to sign, that kind of thing, just figure out where's it going to end up. And we hired a former legislator with great relationships on both sides of the aisle who is in Concord multiple times a week, every week, walking the halls, talking to legislators, making sure they knew what we were doing. We had a lunch for the relevant policy committees. We presented ourselves as people who wanted to help legislators who'd run for office to do good things for their constituents. We wanted to help them deliver great results for their constituents. So we wanted to have a conversation that could help them, that was going to give them something useful to act on, invited them to participate, and so on. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it can make the process a lot smoother and faster, rather than us having spent a lot of time before even starting, trying to get official commitments and so on. There is a way to make the people that are instrumental in converting recommendations into policy, to make them partners in practice by how you do what you do, rather than getting them to sign a piece of paper before you start. So those are some things to keep in mind.
That's great. And just a quick note, please put your audience questions into the YouTube chat. We'll be coming back to them at the end of this time. Richard, so we're starting to talk here about the fact that these exist within a political context. That these exist within a political context, and they need to be aligned with civil society. So interested in your thoughts, having written extensively on this.
So one of the criticisms that's been around for a long time is that these kinds of platforms and citizen assemblies can be extremely useful, extremely important in and of their own right, but they can end up a little bit divorced from the rest of the political system. And the result of that is that citizens' extremely good ideas then are not filtered through the rest of the political system. Citizens then can become somewhat disillusioned that they feel their ideas are not being taken up by the political establishment. And more broadly, it can often mean, Micah, that other democratic actors in political parties or civil society can sometimes feel that these new initiatives are almost competition, a kind of rivalry to their own democratic action. I think that this is not a new point. This is a concern that's been voiced for many, many years. Joe's been working on this and others. Some of these concerns have been addressed in the last 3 or 4 years, and I know Engage California has had this on its agenda right from the beginning. We are moving into a new phase of these kind of initiatives that are seeking to plug their deliberations in a more systematic and permanent way into local legislatures, to link in actors from civil society. So I do think things have improved a lot. The rather jargony phrase that practitioners use to capture this is institutionalization. They talk about the increasing institutionalization of initiatives like Engage California and those run in other countries of the world. So this is a big step forward, but it seems to me that there's still another challenge to take, which is to try to ensure that the quality of deliberation does not improve only through these kind of standalone assemblies and platforms, but begins to resonate throughout the political system, that citizens engage through better deliberation in civil society organizations, through political parties, in their workplaces, in their educational establishments, so on and so forth. That's a much bigger agenda. Of course, I realize it goes well beyond the Engage California agenda, but it seems to me we need to judge these kinds of platforms in terms of the extent to which they can serve as a catalyst for this broader improvement in democratic engagement through the political system. And the one element, Mike, I would add to the debate here is that I think this more political element will become more important for one clear reason, and that is that all these extremely useful local level innovations are today functioning in a political context which is much more hostile to democratic renewal. This is the case, not only the challenge, not only in the United States, but most of the countries, in fact, where these kinds of innovations have been pioneered over the last decade. The sobering reality is that despite many countries having run many of these experiments in an incredibly successful way, the same countries over the same period of time have experienced quite pronounced democratic backsliding. So I think this means that these kind of innovations are more important. It will be more challenging to run them in a successful way, but their political importance, I think, will become all the more significant as they try to carve out islands of exciting and dynamic democratic engagement, when perhaps the political context around them is moving in a much more illiberal direction. I think that's the challenge for all of us, to make sure these kinds of very exciting innovations succeed in the future.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard. Yeah, the context for all this is a little disturbing here in the United States and around the world. But let's stay on the fun and engaging aspect of renewing democracy. Joe, you've written about the need for these kinds of tools to be really engaging to the public, and that it matters how they're designed, and that they feel different than regular democratic participation. What's the best in class you've seen around the world, and how should that inform what we're doing here in the United States?
There's so many, because these tools, just as IFLO is used for Engage California, Consul and Decidim are these full, it's the best two examples, best known around the world. Consul originally with Madrid origins, Decidim with Barcelona origins. I mean, I've seen many great things. Decidim's being used very creatively in a variety of different ways in Brazil, by Brazil localities and states at the moment. Consul's really great. I mean, it's so easy. A reporter from Los Angeles like me can do it. I was in a suburb of Porto called Valongo, which is desperate to sort of be known for things, and I myself just using Consul in 45 minutes as part of I was invited to create a proposal for the people of Valongo for something distinguished. I proposed, I'm American, a baseball nut, so I proposed that Valongo make itself the baseball capital of Europe, and I was able to design a pretty robust kind of online deliberation structure in less than an hour, just me. That's powerful. I think more broadly, where you see these things be good, there are certain elements. There is the fun and engagement. You've got to get people that's on these things and stay on them. And that involves scoreboards. They're usually scoreboards you can sort of see how the engagement is going. If there's voting or choosing of some kind, you can see that in real time. That makes it exciting. You need real stakes. The thing has to, the deliberation has to mean something, draw a response from a government, go to a referendum. It has to have some stakes. And then while transparency is important, some of the ones that are most popular have a little bit of mystery, that there might be some secret sauce or some little Wizard of Oz behind the curtain at some point. It's counterintuitive, but the best example of that was a now defunct, but very popular tool and really online environment for deliberation called Rousseau, which was used by the Five Star Movement, a populist party that rose to power in Italy in the last decade. And I ran one of these free public global forums that I am co-president of in Rome in 2018, working directly with the then mayor Virginia Raji. And I mean, Rousseau really held their attention. One of my memories was they took us, all the people in the forum, the mayor took us out to a beautiful nightclub called California. It had cypress trees. It was outdoors. It was beautiful. There were beautiful people everywhere. But I just couldn't get, the mayor or any of her people on the dance floor because they were all on their phones, engaged in sort of a Rousseau deliberation about a sort of referendum that the party wanted to put on a local ballot. I mean, that's the most engaged thing I have. And Rousseau died not because of lack of engagement ultimately, but because of a dispute between the party and the very mysterious Milan company that ran it. But I mean, those are the elements of what you need for these things to hold their attentions, and they don't last forever. Unlike governments, they're not going to necessarily be there forever. 3 years is a nice, good run, for one of these tools. And since I'm in LA, just like 5 years is a great run for a TV show. It used to get you into syndication.
Sounds good. So Joe talked about maybe it being useful for these to be a little bit Wizard of Oz, but hopefully a lot more fact-based than the old wizard behind his curtain. And Zabri, I know you've focused on the fact that these deliberations need to happen in a high information environment where people are getting objective or at least balanced information to help inform their interaction with each other. And I just wanted to get some of your thoughts on the best practices of doing that.
Happily. This is a really important part of this sort of method. It's powerful, and it's a part of what makes people feel great about the experience. So first, just in terms of why it's important to have really good information that's factual and objective, it creates a level playing field for everyone who's participating. It sends a signal to the participants that the organizers have prepared for them, that they matter, that their time is being taken seriously and valued, and that the people putting this together want it to be productive and want to have them have the best information possible. It saves them time. It's a time saver. That's a good signal. So it does those sorts of things. There are individuals who have the opportunity to join these kinds of conversations who have strong feelings, but recognize that they're not experts and might be reticent to participate fully because they're not sure they have all of the information. And this is a way it's empowering to people like that because it allows them to feel confident in their views and then to engage and go beyond that. And the last thing I'll say in terms of the benefits of it is it's a great way to demonstrate to people that facts do in fact matter and that they can enrich and improve the quality and productivity of a conversation. You're not arguing with them. You're not trying to convince them. You're showing them they're living it and experiencing it. And that's the best way for anyone to learn anything. So those are great. It's not hard to do. Sometimes people say, well, how do you get people to agree? The thing that you're establishing in background material is you're establishing what's known and not known. Everything that's included should be verifiable. Someone should be able to go, find the information somewhere else and it says the same thing. It should be very fully referenced, cited, sourced. You want to be really transparent about where everything comes from so people can track it down themselves if they want. And they don't have time to actually do that. So you also, again, want to have a review panel of people who represent deep expertise from different perspectives, different fields, who have agreed to review the material, sign off. It's the last page of your document. It says, we've all reviewed this. We have different views, but we all agree this is right. You pay them some money, so it's worth their time. They take it seriously. That's a really important shortcut for people as well. If you do those things, you'll have really useful, productive material that will improve the quality of the engagement.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Zabre. So, we've all sort of been mentioning that maybe the United States missed the initial deliberative moment, or one of the deliberative moments that happened a little while ago. So, Richard, you're coming to us here from the future, at least those of us who are here in the United States, and I just wanted you to spin out a little bit more. Okay, so as we ride this wave of deliberative engagement, what are the most important sort of lessons learned, pitfalls to avoid if we really want to get our feet under us and help renew and reinvigorate democracy, particularly in this authoritarian moment globally?
I would echo many of the points that Sabina made. I think they're absolutely crucial. Set expectations clearly and realistically at the beginning of the process, so citizens know what is going to happen to their recommendations and they don't get disappointed or turned off the experience when they don't see every single idea being translated into something concrete. Don't set agendas too tightly. Give citizens room to breathe, to bring their own thoughts, their own concerns onto the agenda. Don't make them feel that they are there just to validate a pre-cooked governmental set of concerns. Get good experts involved, but make sure these experts are sensitive. Make sure they're not too didactic in the way that they try and cajole citizens towards certain conclusions. That has been a problem in some of these innovations in some countries. Keep participants engaged after they've been through some of these assemblies or been engaged on platforms. Maybe make sure they keep engaged through parties, new civil society initiatives, and take forward some of the enthusiasm and the fun of democratic deliberation over the long term. Build in some cultural and media activities around platforms and assemblies to make sure they're not just a kind of niche technical area, but they can infuse the citizenry in a much broader sense. And then finally, keep in for the long haul. As others have said here, there have been many really positive experiences that then have been cut short. There should be a realization that this needs to be a process supported over a long. It's not going to provide a panacea for democratic renewal in the short term, and it needs to be seen. Investment in things like Engage California and other equivalents need to be seen as the first modest step in a long-term process, much wider process of democratic reform. And then finally, what we've all been saying: build in links to parties, civil society organizations, legislatures, and make sure that these platforms function not just only as successes in and of their own right, but as one part of a broader ecosystem of really good quality democratic deliberation.
Awesome, thank you so much. So we're actually going to turn to some of the questions that we've been getting in the YouTube chat, and the first one is around surprising outcomes. Just speaking to Engage California specifically, just echoing the senior counselor. To say that one of the big surprising outcomes is this has actually been pretty great, right? I think we're all kind of acculturated to online interaction between people being an absolute worst of people. And so the fact that they've been engaging in this platform in really respectful and constructive ways, they've been actually coming to consensus even in initial phases of the deliberation, and really offering up not just kind of complaints and concerns, but real solutions, even very like pragmatic solutions around making sure that there are central areas for mental health services to be delivered. I think is one of the more surprising aspects and happy surprise, I guess I would say, of Engage California. But I'd love to get your folks any experiences you've had with a surprising outcome from any of these deliberative engagements, which in some ways is what we want these to be, versus a carefully controlled process which results in precisely what the commissioning body was expecting. So what sort of surprising outcomes have we seen? Zabre. And
that just
everybody
happened.
Make sure to
Am I there? I'm unmuted. I have a great example of something that I just witnessed a couple of weeks ago at Fort Collins in Colorado, where there was a local citizens assembly underway over a land use planning question. And over the course, so I was there on a Saturday, and there was a period of time dedicated to small breakout. The all of the delegates to the process were divided into small groups of 4 or 5, and then they all met separately with a panel of experts to answer questions on, and they were stakeholders really who wanted the space to be used differently. And when this process had started, they all viewed their preference as mutually exclusive with the other 3 or 4 things, that it had to be, if you do it my way, you can't do the others, please pick me, here's why. That's where their conversation started. So over the course of this day, this group of stakeholders were presenting repeatedly to the different groups of delegates, and they're hearing themselves make the same pitch. And you can hear them, as the day progresses, start to recognize that their desires are not, in fact, mutually exclusive. And by the last presentation, they were instead saying, actually, you can do all of these things if you do this. So they went through their own processes. It was not really planned. It's like kids co-playing. And it was, I've never seen that before. And it was something that I made a note of, like, do this again. This is actually a really interesting opportunity to allow people on that side of the conversation to discover how they can actually collaborate in ways they didn't anticipate.
Fantastic. Richard?
I had 2. So I wasn't so excited about the point. One is in several European countries. There have been deliberations to do with immigration that have been quite surprising, where opinion polls would suggest that populations are quite hostile towards immigration. And when they get into detailed deliberation about the issue, they become a little bit more sensitive and understanding about how complicated the problem is. They may not become liberal idealists, but they do become a little bit more sensitized to just what a tricky question that particular issue is. And second, there was one process run at the level of the European Union, where citizens had some really good ideas about the big questions to do with the future of Europe. And that seems surprising to me, that it's often said that citizens engage only with the issues that affect their immediate surroundings. But this experience showed that they do also think big, and they have concerns about these kind of really big existential political issues shaping the future. So I'd suggest those 2 surprising outcomes for me.
I think it's worth noting that, in particular reference to what Richard said about immigration, there's a tendency in these processes, moderating tendency for people to look for win-wins and to avoid big, a clear loser. That there's a real strong king of that. But in surprise, and a lot of them involve land use, and sometimes make very surprising choices. There's one that involved actually using the Madrid technology in Montevideo, Uruguay, that I saw, where there was it was about traffic and reducing Montevideo traffic, and the expectation had been, at least of the city, was that there would be ways to speed up traffic, but when they got into it, the people desperately tried to slow it down and wanted to put up street lights, traffic lights everywhere. Montevideo, as a result, has more traffic lights than any city, per space of any city I've ever been in.
Fantastic. So the next question that we have is, I guess we'll know this matters if it results in concrete outcomes, but these are really also supposed to be improving the quality of civic engagement generally and people's opinions about democracy and so on. How will we know, how do we measure whether or not these processes actually do that? Or do folks have a general sense that they have? Richard?
For me, this question hits the absolute nub of a very thorny problem, is that what I was trying to get at, that clearly in the context of these individual initiatives, civic engagement has been shown to be very successful. People want to engage, they're enthusiastic about it, they follow through, they have really good things to say. But then if you look at the broader debates about democracy, you all know that every year people debate these democracy indices. and how they're declining. The quality of democracy is declining year on year around the world. And they all have measurements for civic engagement, for democratic participation, that are really quite separate from the organizing of all these citizen assemblies and online digital platforms. And these function almost as two separate worlds. So actually, I think a big issue is we don't really have good methodological way, it seems to me, of connecting these debates about the overall state of democracy on the one hand and the efficacy of these individual initiatives on the other hand. And I think it's probably incumbent on all of us interested in being engaged in making these initiatives successful in trying to close that gap a bit. So I think it's a really good question, and it's I think part of the kind of Achilles heel a little bit of this kind of area of democratic innovations, at least so far.
So the problem is even bigger. It's part of a much bigger problem, which we don't have good measures and don't compare and don't have data on local. These are mostly local governance and implementation in the world. And, you know, given the state of our nation states around the world and the fact that more and more problems, very complex global problems are falling to the local level, it's a massive void that desperately needs to be filled. We need measures. We need local governments to be able to see what each other are doing and figuring out what's working and doing it better. Because it's locals that are, you know, all the problems in the world are getting dumped at the local level.
I don't know how to, there we are. I just want to add quickly attention here. And that is, all of this work it assumes people have time to participate in their communities with a civic hat on, because it's all volunteer. This is all free time. It's going to public meetings at night and participating and learning and talking to neighbors and all this stuff. And we have to pay attention to the economy and society that we're creating, because we have one now for a lot of people. If you live in a two-parent household or two-person household, both people have to work. We increasingly have to work more and more. You know, people have their own experiences, but people will relate to that. We keep adding all of these new technologies and opportunities, but they all cost money. So you need more and more money to sort of afford to live. The affordability is a huge issue not just in California, but in the country, in the United States, and I'm sure elsewhere. So we need sort of a global view here of, if we want people to be able to participate. Democracy is hard work, and it doesn't ever end. It doesn't stop, you know, and we could take a poll where everyone feels better one year, and the next year they could fall over the cliff again. It's like, it's constant. And if it is a value, if we care, if we want the general public to be able to engage in an informed way in governance, we have to make room for it and time for it. And that also is that's a conversation that I don't hear being had. And I think it would be very worthwhile.
Well, let's have it, because that's actually one of the questions from our audience. You know, so obviously California is a big and diverse state with people of all kinds of socioeconomic backgrounds, you know, ethnic backgrounds, you know, different lived experience. And I think one of the concerns about this is this only going to be terminally online elites that are participating, especially in these digital engagements? How do we ensure that that we're taking the best lessons from in-person engagements? And one of our commenters actually talked about paying people for their participation to the extent that it's in person, thinking about coverage for childcare and so on. So I just wanted to get people's thoughts on how do we make sure this is really reaching a representative cross-section of the public instead of just reinforcing elite consensus. Joe?
Oh, I mean, I think I'm going to answer the question by framing a bit differently. I mean, I think this area, it's not just these particular processes or this kind of deliberation. What the possibility here is for, I mean, we have the public square is dying. You know, tech and the way our tech works essentially creates these private conversations between groups. It doesn't. It's against the public square at some level, and the German philosopher Byung-Chul Han writes about this. What you're trying to create is actually to rebuild a public square in the digital space with public entities doing it, where everyone is actually truly welcome and you can see the full conversation. I mean, that's the power of this. It's not some little thing in California to figure out what communities might do after fires. It's about trying to create that kind of networking where we can all talk to each other, and that can be at all levels. I mean, a lot of the potentials for creating a greater sort of planetary awareness for this age of, you know, this planetary crisis. I mean, the stakes could not be higher. I mean, I think we're going to move in that direction, but it's very early, and it's very open to what that kind of infrastructure is going to be. I mean, we're trying to ultimately build something that, you know, puts those meta people up in Palo Alto out of business.
I mean, I think your point is very well taken, that we're not doing this well now. We have a lot of mechanisms for, you know, engaging with impacted residents in California, so on and so forth, but they are effectively, I'm sorry, largely community theater. You know, we all know that, you know, going and shouting at public officials at meetings doesn't really, you know, sort of matter. And then a lot of times these advisory groups are just box checking exercises that don't really move public policy. Richard, what have you seen around the world to ensure that these types of deliberative exercises, whether they're online or in person, really do bring in the voices of a broad cross-section of people and not just online elites?
The evidence from some of the European experiences is a little bit sobering, that many of the digital platforms that rely on self-selection tend to attract advocacy groups who would be engaged in their traditional advocacy offline and simply use the digital platform as another kind of a part of their advocacy arsenal. So it seems to me that, very much in the spirit of what Joe was saying, these platforms are very useful, but only as a kind of first step for generating wider, but not so much as an end in themselves, but as a way then of catalyzing broader debate around really kind of rigorous methodology of sortition and random selection that gets around this issue of people who are already engaged taking advantage of the new tools, and the new tools not being able to bring in voices that would not normally engage. It seems to me there's a role for both of those kinds of tools, but they do need to be working much more in harmony with each other. In the best cases, at least in the European experience, that has worked, and I think it is now on the agenda. Policymakers, practitioners do seem to recognize that there needs to be these different levels of engagements, different types of platforms and assemblies all working together, and there's no one single format that can be a kind of panacea for all of democracy's ills at the local level.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying that, you know, with Engage California, we've been very careful to reach out to community groups, trusted messenger networks, faith communities, and so on, to bring people into these platforms. And bridging the digital divide is different than it was 20 years ago. These are tools you can access on your cell phone with a data plan, and almost everybody has one of these, versus having to go in and everybody having a fancy, you know, giant desktop in their house. But it's not easy. I think the other thing that's worth saying is that even in these digital engagements, you can use the wonky term is sortition, but essentially the civic lottery, where you select among the people that have volunteered to participate, such that you do create a representative mini public. But making sure that you have that group is something that is incredibly difficult to do and takes a lot of intention and effort. And we don't want to have to relearn all of our lessons around equity again in the digital space after having done them in the civic space. But I want to pivot, since it's 2025. We're not allowed to have any conversations about anything without talking about artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence is something that is increasingly being used as an ally in this space. Whether it's, making sense of the sort of wall of text that you get from these types of engagements, or, other aspects. So just wanted to see if the panel had any comments on how the robots can be helpful here as we move towards making sure that these deliberative and digital democratic engagements are successful. Joe.
I mean, you see it in a lot of different ways. You talked about summaries and capture of information. You're seeing a lot in the moderation. AI is becoming the moderator. Our friends at Stanford, leaders in this area, Jim Fishkin, Al Su, I always forget the name of the institute. They're going to get me. Center for Deliberative. It's a Deliberative Democracy Center. Have AI introduced into their deliberative polling method and the online thing to try to equalize how much people talk. So it's a fairer, more balanced kind of conversation. But a lot of which sees this sort of capturing thing. I mean, I was at there was a youth homelessness citizens assembly, an in-person assembly in Deschutes County, that's sort of South Central Oregon, some months ago, in Bend, the city of Bend, Oregon, where there were these folks from MIT using a tool called Cortico, which were capturing the audio of everything that was said in the different parts of the assembly when everyone was together and in the small groups. Though they were keeping it secret. They were not talking much about doing it, and they were and saying to me, a journalist there, and even the member assembly, you couldn't actually go back and hear this. Created a little bit of question and tension, figuring out if you capture everybody's voice and every tone. Assemblies often grant some public anonymity or let the members decide whether they want to be fully known to the public. I mean, there's a lot of kind of questions in that, but the notion of Cortico, which has a history out of the MIT Media Lab, can we capture all this stuff and learn more about what makes conversations work better, produce better recommendations? I mean, I think that those are the kind of things that they're trying to do, to the extent they shared with me what they're up to, which they didn't share much.
Right on. Well, I know that one of the ways in which the robots are potentially very helpful in this regard, and Rich, I'll come right to you after this, is there's just a question about access to things like Engage California for non-English speakers or English language learners. All the materials for this particular program have been translated into the top languages, but in the pilot case, since this is people interacting with each other, the interactions themselves are in English. And we probably don't want in the future to segment the interactions by different languages. You don't want to only have the Spanish speakers talking to the Spanish speakers, but there are now artificial intelligence tools coming online that are really good at contemporaneous translation. So bringing people into dialogue with each other in a real way, even if they don't share a language, is something that we may be able to leverage artificial intelligence to help do and improve access. Richard.
Yes, over here, I think the AI enhanced deliberation, moderation of deliberation has become fairly standard practice. And I think it has been moderately useful, as Joe was saying, in collating citizen preferences, providing information to enhance deliberation, and then obviously in suggesting possible consensual positions between polarized extremes. So I think that's all been very useful, and it's fairly widespread now, as is the use of AI tools to help politicians become more responsive to their citizen preferences and help citizens to understand better what the behavior of their politicians, their representatives, how they're voting, whether they're following through on their party manifestos and promises and so on and so forth. So I think all that is useful. I think we should just be cautious and not think that all of that is relatively small scale, it seems to me, compared with the underlying structural problem of the business models of the platforms and the rather more existential question and challenge that AI poses in terms of essential democratic agency, what it means for the fact that democracy relies on mass citizen engagement and choices and citizens being able to express preferences. And I think that that's still a much larger question that we haven't yet really got to grips with. However useful these more kind of moderate uses of AI tools may be in deliberative initiatives.
Gabriel? Unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry. Hang on. There we are. Someone else is doing that, I think. But where it can save time and accelerate analysis or something that's useful, it is essential, though, in these processes that they be very transparent. People have to be able to see their ideas, their words move through the process. They have to be able to understand it. They have to feel like they're in control of it, and that there's not someone behind a curtain who knows better than they do what they think, moving things around just because it's making it work faster and neater and cleaner. Like, so that that sort of transparency and control should never be traded away. And also keep it simple. This stuff simple is better. It's less likely to break. And again, people from all different backgrounds are more likely to be able to trust it because they can understand it. That's also something to take very seriously throughout the process. Don't get carried away with bells and whistles.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much to all of you for such a rich conversation, ranging from the use of AI to whether this is going to, improve the quality of our democracies worldwide, exactly how it works. Thank you again to Senior Counselor Tong for coming in and giving us a briefing on Engaged California specifically. And so at this point, I want to pass it back to Ian to close us out. But thank you again, members of the panel.
No, just a huge thank you to Richard in Europe and to some of our colleagues from Asia, actually, such as Audrey Tang, who've advised us on our thinking about this too. And so it goes across both oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific, to Zabre and Joe, and to Amy for joining today. California, in some ways, is very far ahead on these processes, and in some ways behind and catching up. But and so we look forward to increasingly moving into the lead over the course of the next 6 months and a year, and with insights from the public, most importantly. So thanks to everyone and our experts from around the globe.